Good afternoon. Well, welcome to the Banking Analysis Symposium. My name is Dancy, and I'm coming to you live from my house here in Tennessee, which is a little bit connected today, probably not as connected as I am and as most of you are. We're going to be talking a lot about what it's like to live a connected life in today's day and age. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put them on Twitter at #AskChris. Or you can put them at the end with the announcer. We'll have someone who will actually take the questions from you, and we'll go ahead and they'll get them to me and we can answer them. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and then you should be able to see my screen, and I'm going to disappear to the corner, and then we'll be good to go. So it's going to be this really weird moment where I'm going to like fall into this vortex, and then I'll be back. So hold on, we're going to fall into a little vortex here. All right, vortex start. And then hopefully now you all can see my screen. You know, this can always be so difficult when you're actually on site, much less away. So today's session is called the Human Information System, or the Quantified Life. You can tweet at me, like I said, and we'll go ahead and get started. One of the things that the Quantified Self movement does is when they have a talk is they ask 3 questions. What did you do? How did you do it? And what did you learn? So I thought that's what we would do today. I'm going to start off with, what did you do? Well, I made a decision 5 years ago to never go offline. But going offline was actually kind of easy. It was the never part that was hard, because so much of my life was already online and so much of it was already offline. So let's talk about the 5 areas that I decided to not take and ever go offline with. The first one, and probably the one most of us are familiar with, was my health. So my doctor didn't know much about my well-being. I'd been visiting him for probably close to 15 years. And every time I would go, he would go through a big chart. He would make a lot of notes, and he would just give me just a little bit of information, not have much feedback. So I started saying to myself, I wonder if I should keep track of what my doctor's telling me. So I started making notes at the visit when I would leave. This turned into a longer, bigger progression for me. Sometime around 2010, then I started really getting heavy into using WebMD to look up both my symptoms, but also my history, because I had been keeping track of it before I'd even had a smartphone, going back to 2006. Sometime around 2011, I went to my physician and I said to him, is there any way I can get a copy of all of my medical records? And I signed my own release form and went ahead and got a copy of these and had them transcribed, had 15 years worth of labs put into a spreadsheet, and had all of my actual handwritten notes transcribed and then put into a flat file so I could search them. By 2012, I was using a lot of big data online, so everything from flu near you to Google flu trends. So I could march into my doctor and say, here's what happens every year at this time. Here's the statistical data that's happening in my neighborhood. Here's the lab results historically to back this up. Can we just get this over with? I'm probably one of the few people that's ever been fired by their doctor. Shortly after that, I really got into a lot of the crowdsourced websites. So things like Patient Near Me or Cure Together or Inspire are sites where patients with similar fears, concerns, health risks can go and share their day-to-day behavior and health habits. But to me, it really was this pool of people who are considered the worried well. And to me, it wasn't about getting or staying healthy, but it was more about constantly being worried, am I well, am I well, am I well? And there was a host of ways that I was doing this from not only the doctor and these crowdsourced sites, but I was also starting to put devices on my body. And we've all heard about wearables and the very powerful nature of wearables, but ultimately for me, wearables were all about understanding what was in my body by putting something outside my body. So just like a telephone allows me to take and forget phone numbers and addresses and maps and everything else, wearables really allow me to forget my body. And that may be a good thing, it may not be a good thing. History will tell us that. But for me, it was a great thing because I suddenly had data about my own behavior that was invisible to me before. One of the most crucial things I learned was just because I was taking steps doesn't mean I was active. The next thing I noticed in this quest to get healthy and really go never offline was that the Walgreens up the street from my house in Denver had been remodeled. And it was one of these new generation Walgreens. And it looked a lot like the Apple store. You would walk in, there were people in great smocks and outfits, all dressed identically. There was a Genius bar where you could actually drop off and talk to someone, get a flu shot, get a pneumonia shot. But more importantly, next to this bar at the Walgreens, there were hundreds and hundreds of devices. And even more interestingly enough, there were starting to be hundreds and hundreds of different types of tests I could run on myself at home. Everything from colon disease to genetic paternity tests to allergy tests to HIV tests, all that I could run at home and keep track of myself. And I realized that this disruption that we saw in so many parts of the world of business was really coming, and it was coming quickly for healthcare. I also, like everyone else, got into 23andMe. It's a great site. It allowed me to see a lot of my genealogy, but more importantly, let me look at some of my risk factors from my mother and my father. I also explored a site called UBioMe, which does research and studies on your microbiomes. So I got deep within inside my body with the goal of really understanding my whole health when it comes to my organs and my behavior as a system. So everything from my environment to finding science exchange online, which allows you to order experiments, which other sites that allow you to order gene testing on yourself beyond 23andMe, to sites that have consumer-like experiences like Exogen, which will take your blood and let you know how much DNA damage is done at any given time. So if you wanted to start maybe trying to take a half an hour extra a night's sleep, and do that for a month, you can use Exogen to see if it's actually cutting down on the damage to your DNA. The second part of not going offline was really understanding my identity. And so much of my identity, and many people's identity today, is tied to what they do when they're online. And there's this concept called digital dualism. I won't go into that, but it's a very simple premise that there really is no online or offline. There's just life. But it's interesting, I was thinking about this, and it occurred to me that much of my behavior was a lot like I Dream of Jeannie. And some of you who remember this show from 1970 will remember that Jeannie never wanted to go to her bottle, but if she made Major Nelson mad, he ordered her to her bottle. And she would get all angry and she would turn into smoke, and then poof, she'd be in her bottle. Interestingly enough, though, once she got in her bottle, she didn't mind. And it's a lot like our devices. Once we actually get in them, when we start using them, we don't mind. But when they're just sitting there relentlessly calling to us, we do kind of fear we're going to get ordered back into our bottles. So what is this identity that gets created? Well, for me, it was about going into my phone, about going into my computer, about going into the devices on my body, about going into my bank statements, about going into my utility bills, going into types of music I was purchasing, the types of movies I was watching, and really understanding these 10 facets of my life. And the screen you're looking at now is literally all 10 of those facets as represented by placards. And then behind the placards are the actual screenshots of the data that tied up all of this information. So I understood at a very deep level what I was doing, but unfortunately it took weeks to just have a single comprehensive picture, and it was just scattered bits of information. Lastly, what I wanted to do in this part was really examine, was my behavior tied to other things in my life? So by putting sensors throughout my home, sensors in my vehicles, sensors in my furniture, sensors on my pets, putting sensors as many places as I could so they wouldn't get in the way but still collect information, I was able to start to really examine the data exhaust that was coming off of me and other things to look for any types of patterns. In 2012, I shared a photo on Instagram that drove some of my friends crazy. It was a very simple picture to the left there, and it showed me walking down a street in Denver. It had just begun snowing about an hour beforehand. And I used two different apps to overlay information into the Instagram photo. One was an app that showed what song I was listening to. Another one just showed the weather at that time. But what's interesting about this picture in 2012 is it's one of the first times we can see a lot of information compressed into a very, very small area, or a lot of data exhaust. So in this one photo, I captured where I was, the actual picture itself, the temperature, humidity, what the wind, what it felt like, and what song I was listening to. By 2013, I was doing even more. I was doing real-time posture tracking along with real-time heart rate full-time, and measuring and tying that into sleep and other areas of my life. And of course, by this year, I was doing everything from altitude to velocity to history to ambient noise and ambient light collection in real time. Because I was noticing oftentimes I was eating wildly and I couldn't really understand why, but just simply understanding what the lighting was like in a room affected drastically the types of food that I would eat, but more importantly, how fast I ate it. You'll notice that some of the worst food you ever will eat will come in a brightly lit room. Online version 3 was really about perspective, and this comes from Nintendo. When you pull a cartridge out, it gives you this message that everything not saved will be lost. And I realized for me, I was not saving a lot of information in the early days between 2008 and 2009. So I had to find a way to get this information out of these systems and make it exposed and accessible to me in an easy way. This meant kind of understanding how information recording and information retrieval works. Some of the oldest human pieces of information are stone and cave drawings from 30,000 years ago. But if we go even less than that and go 2,000 years ago, we've got things like the Rosetta Stone, some of our first papyrus. If we go back 500 years ago, we've got books. Strangely enough, we only have about 1% of the written documents from Roman times, 0.5% from Greece, but 0.0001% from Egypt. But this number is wildly huge compared to the actual amount of information we're saving today. Because unlike books and papyrus and stones and caves, the systems that we use to save information in today don't last. The average floppy will only last 15 years if you can even find a floppy drive to read it on. Most web pages are changed every 100 days, or more importantly, they're deleted. So everything you touch digital is put into a system that's purposely designed to evaporate. But more importantly, the types of services that we're bringing onto line now into our consumer lives, into our family, actually are built with a basic level of ephemerality inside them. You know, Blogger was a long-form blogging network. YouTube, it took a lot of work to create videos. You know, if you look at the types of acquisitions and the value of these companies, you'll notice the more ephemeral or the more temporary the information, the more money the company's worth. Waze is a crowdsourcing GPS system. If you report an accident on Waze, that accident might be there for an hour, 3 hours, 4 hours most, and then it's gone. Yet Google thought that temporary or just-in-time information was worth $1 billion. And a lot of people today use something called Snapchat. What's great about Snapchat is it forces someone's attention because they have to hold the screen and stare at it or they miss it. But Snapchat's been valued at up to $3 billion, some say $10 billion. So what does it mean that we're putting stuff in systems that won't last another 10 to 15 years? But more importantly, we're creating information in systems that we want to disappear. Your digital life is a lot like the Ark of the Covenant. It's full of this vast warehouse of these super rare and very powerful artifacts, but you can't find any of them. Who's your Indiana Jones? Really, the last step on this journey was understanding my privilege. Because at 40, when I started this project, and 46 now, I had done okay with work, and it took a lot to get this level of information to me. So on my body, I wear close to $10,000 worth of sensors. Now, you probably call them mobile phones or wearables, or you have lots of consumer names for them, but they're just sensors, and they're collecting information about you all the time. And that $10,000 is really not for the devices themselves. It's for something much more insidious. So let's talk about my house before we talk about the insidiousness. In my home, I have close to $20,000 worth of investment in sensors. So how do you spend $30,000 on things for your body and things for your home? And what would you do with them, or why would you even do it? Interestingly enough, the cost for the actual devices isn't $30,000. It's probably $3,000 to $5,000. The rest of that $30,000 is these providers selling you back your own information in services. Most of these services, whether you've got a Nest drop cam at home or you're using a Fitbit, have premium accounts. These premium accounts charge you to sell you access to analysis and raw data from yourself. Finally, I had to come to terms with, I had a serious problem, as you're all figuring out. And I really didn't know how to describe it until a friend of mine shared a photo with me. I think it started for me about year 3 when I got into an elevator in England, and I noticed when I went to push the button on the elevator to go to a floor that the sign didn't have the normal weight limit. It had the normal weight limit, but then a bunch more information. So we could allow 9 people on this elevator, 1 horse, 5,000 bananas, almost 3,000 pigeons, or about 10,500 pound coins. But this made me think, it wasn't just me. There were more people out there like me who saw information, and they saw it everywhere. You see, I had to come out of my data closet, and I had to come out as data sexual. And this meant I understood that the information around me was important, and access to that information and how I could use it separated me from the rest of my peers. So how did I do it? How did I get all this information and turn my life into something that people talk about now? Well, it started out relatively simple. I decided that there were 3 types of information in my life. Soft data, that's the type of information that was created when I sent an email or a text or shared something on social media, where I said, hey, this is me. This is who I want to be today. You see, because in soft data, you can construct your identity. Hard data, though, the data of the devices that you put on your body, that's harder to fake. Much more difficult to say, the room is 100 degrees, so turn down the air conditioning. If I have a thermometer that says, no, the room's only 72 degrees, take off the 4 sweaters you're wearing. Or, I am so upset, but my heart rate is actually calm. And then finally, core data, the information from blood results, genetics, and other types of lab systems that you can't get from wearing something. So soft data was the constructed information of who I was. Hard data was the information that was coming from the sensors on my body and in my home. And the core data was the actual deep information inside my body. But what did I do with this? So I understood basically who I was. Well, I designed a low friction data collection system. That's a very fancy way of saying I wanted just to live life and have information happen and get recorded. I didn't want to write things down. I didn't really want to wear sensors. If I could take a sensor off and put a sensor on something, like on the back of a chair, on the bottom of a bed, that's much easier than wearing a sensor. I then took those 10 areas of my life and mapped them to Maslow's hierarchy of needs because I wanted to understand, were some pieces of data outside of the core, soft, and hard more important than others? So maybe I should be worried about staying employed before I worry about taking that amazing trip to Italy. The last step was taking all of this information as it was collected in a low friction way in the background and moving it into a data repository. To me, I then had to figure out, how do I view and work with all of this information about myself? So the most obvious way was put it in a calendar. Google Calendar was a repository for the visual representation of any day. But unlike most people's calendars, where they have a few meetings and some things they have to remember to do, my calendar was filled with thousands of items every single day from what I did. I then moved the information into cloud repositories as text files, into cloud repositories as spreadsheets, and used Stanford's sentiment analysis engine to actually analyze a lot of the information. So suddenly, my life took on a whole new meaning, literally, because I could search it, like you can search Google. I could run reports on it. I could view it. I could review it. It was just literally incredible. It was like having my whole life on my phone, but exposed to me. What did I learn? Well, Douglas Rushkoff, who wrote Present Shock, has a quote, and he says, when the only value left is time, the world becomes a clock. And that's probably the first and most profound thing I learned about information. The data I was collecting was creating what I call the relentless now. Many of us go through our day so busy, we can't even keep up with all the things we have to do. There's this feeling we're always being drugged from one thing to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. Unlike my parents, I'm not slowing down, I'm speeding up. And what does that do to the mind when we're constantly being pulled back into a moment in which we know there's no escaping? For me, being able to see thousands of these moments all at once and understanding that I was connected to all of them at first was very disconcerting. But in the end, it brought me great peace because I could start to see reason and meaning behind the relentless now. But it's not just me talking about the relentless now. You'll notice that a lot of our systems that we're creating are purposely built on this premise. The new Apple iPhone in its text messaging in iOS 8 has exactly 7 different ways you can connect or unconnect from someone. Everything from location to video, to text, to audio, to different types of audio. It's crazy. This isn't about contacting people. This is about avoiding people. And if you look at online, Facebook and a lot of online social services have things like Throwback Thursday or Flashback Friday. I think it's interesting we need to be reminded what day of the week it is and what year it may be. Also, the types of devices that we use are radically changing the relentless now. The new iPhone, again, shoots photos, sure, and it's got a great new camera, but it's got 3 different ways of slowing down or changing time. You can speed it up with time lapse or slow it down with slow-mo, or capture an entire moment or an entire view in a video or a panoramic. It's not a photo, it's a time machine. Even applications today, like Snapchat or Instagram's Hyperlace, play with time itself. Snapchat has a filter that just shows you the velocity you're traveling at. And in business, we see things like in case you missed it or too long, don't read. All of this is leading us to create moments that are so temporarily heavy that when we try to share them, we understand why we can't escape the relentless now. Because we're always being pulled back in with more and more and more information. This is a photo I put on Instagram, much like the one I did in 2012. But I used an app called VidStitch that I noticed a lot of young people were using. And they would stitch together a bunch of videos and information and photos to show somebody a single moment that was comprised of so much information. Next, information. Birds born in a cage think flying is an illness. For me, that was about understanding that just because I wasn't sleeping well, it didn't mean I wasn't well. It meant my world wasn't. More often than not, waking up in the middle of the night was a symptom of a change in the light, the temperature, the sound, or the air pressure in my room. It had nothing to do with me not sleeping well. My room wasn't. Driving aggressively had more to do with the levels of CO2 I was exposed to in my home or office right before I got in my car than actually my mood. And my mood? Well, my mood was made up of so many more things than just how I was feeling physically and what I was thinking. It had so many things to do with the way that I interacted with the world, but more importantly, with the way the world interacted with me. And just because I was dealt a set of cards that said that I was probably going to have deep vein thrombosis and age-related macular degeneration, or melanoma and Crohn's disease and multiple sclerosis, and the hundreds of other genetic variables I am marked to die from or come in contact with, doesn't mean I have to have them. You see, feedback doesn't have to mean judgment. I could use the information from my phone and that I was collecting to create a positive feedback loop. A feedback loop that said, you're closer to 3,000 calories instead of 3,500 calories. Let's stay there. This person doesn't make you real happy. Let's avoid them. This music makes you very sedentary. Let's change it. And by programming my home and my entire life to constantly give me this positive feedback, I was able to lose 120 pounds in just over 2 years. And this wasn't easy. I was a 2-pack-a-day smoker who was over 300 pounds for most of my adult life. I hadn't even been able to wear regular men's clothing since I was 13 years old. But the power of the information being locked away from me, and sometimes in very insidious ways, was amazing, and it freed me. Finally, People don't act like machines, but in every situation where they're given the choice, they will behave like a machine. It's the value of identity. You see, you're not at St. Peter's Basilica as much as your behavior is at St. Peter's Basilica. Your heart rate, the amount of steps you take, how fast you climb steps, that's a data doppelganger. It represents who you are from a hard data level. It's kind of like the exhaust you would see if you searched for black jeans on Google and then went to another site and saw an ad for black jeans, except it's your physical data doppelganger. We've been talking about who we are inside machines for a very long time. Ever since we had You've Got Mail with Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks, their relationship was all about meeting online and then meeting in real life. But we somehow evolved to a world where Joaquin Phoenix could have a relationship without a keyboard or a screen. He had a relationship with someone in his ear who was in a machine in the cloud. So our very identity is patterned and shaped by the type of interaction and the type of view we have of ourselves inside our phones. Our phones act more like mirrors than they do communication devices. Some examples of this. Someone on Twitter sent out, any moment I don't have a notification on Twitter or Facebook is a failure. And then a meme I really liked. Today I found out my boyfriend turned off his read receipts on his phone. And one of my favorites, and then this person made their account private. I can't join Elo because I consider myself a product. You see, the consistency that we create in machines defines who we are. Have you ever stood in a grocery line and tried to scan your groceries perfectly so you wouldn't be judged by the person behind you? Or more importantly, terrified by having the cashier approach you because you've made a mistake? Or have you ever contorted your body to get just the right selfie? Or had to press into someone who wanted to capture you in their selfie? Or held your phone up like Lion King to get a signal? I think it best summed up by this person who tweeted, the card reader at the gas pump won't read my card, so now I have to go inside and pay like a poor person. You see, we imprint our identity in the ability to use systems and avoid other people. And it's never been easier to do that. Over on Tinder, there's a guy who doesn't even have a profile photo. It's just a screenshot of his bank balance. And then one of my favorites, my 7-year-old paused in the middle of a sentence while thinking what next to say. And then my 10-year-old said, hold on, Dad, he's just buffering. It comes down to this. You auto-complete me. You become what you bend into. Finally, the power of the unaided mind is highly overrated. The real powers come from devising external aids to enhance your cognitive abilities. So is all information worth saving? Is it worth living a life like Chris Dancy? There is power in perspective. I call this perspective as a service. This perspective can free you from many things. It can liberate you from the relentless now. A lot of apps are starting to tap into the power of perspective, the power of handing something back to the consumer, something to tell them about who they are. I like apps like Time Hop. Every day I get a reminder of something that happened a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Or email services that randomly send me emails in the middle of the day that say, 621 days ago, you said this. You see, when you can take time and have perspective on your life and have it introduced in a way that feels kind, you want to be involved with yourself and you want to be involved with other people because you're not stuck in the relentless now. You and everyone are free because you have time and you can see it. Fitness trackers aren't about steps. They're about your time. You're not looking at how many steps you took today. You're looking at how much time you spent today. Wearables are only popular because you can see yourself. Probably one of the first apps you were visible in. Perspective is powerful. 600 years ago, a Japanese village created something called a tsunami stone, and they put them all over the village. After hundreds of years of no tsunamis, the Japanese had built over these tsunami stones. They had all the information about the tsunamis and how to avoid them. But enough time had gone by. They'd forgotten the information. It was irrelevant. Well, it wasn't irrelevant when the tsunami finally came 600 years later. You see, some things require long-term thinking. You can't think about your job or your life as if it's this year, next year, or this 50 years. You have to think about your life in relationship to a much longer time frame, 1,000 years, 10,000 years. You see, resilience is the act of perpetual perspective. Everything you want to be and are afraid you can't be, you can, but you need to become resilient. The implications of this world are absolutely phenomenal. Some people are starting to really focus on social, mobile, analytical, and cloud, but to me, we're past that. We need to be looking at sensors, environments, algorithms, and mesh networks. We need to realize that it's not a phone that takes pictures, it's a camera that makes calls. And it's soon becoming a biological instrument to keep track of your health. We all know that Google and Apple have both announced health applications in the native phone. The new iPhone 6 has a barometer that keeps track of your health at a different way than it ever kept track of before. And it has something called HomeKit that connects to all the systems in your home. You see, your body in your life is the platform for computing. And if this wasn't apparent enough, 2 months ago, when there was an earthquake in California, Jawbone released the data of everyone waking up in the middle of the night as the earthquake hit. Not one person mentioned anything about privacy. I don't think what Jawbone did was right or wrong. I just think the distance between our convenience and our privacy is a mirror. Which begs the question, is there a difference between Big Brother and Big Mother? You see, Big Brother is using information in a way that benefits the bigger picture, the world of corporations. Big Mother is a way that corporations can use that same information to benefit you. You deserve a Big Mother. You don't deserve a Big Brother. Nest, just last week, announced an integration with the Jawbone app. Now, if you're not sleeping well, your house will change temperature automatically. You don't need to get up, get extra blankets. Your body's talking to your house. The things I've talked about for years weren't in the far distant future. They're actually in the past. Your car with an automatic sensor will now talk to your home. Your home will talk to your car. Your indoor weather stations, when you take selfies, will put the actual picture of the room you're taking the selfie in on the picture. You see, everything is the platform. But what's about to happen next is really going to change things. There's a lot of talk about the Apple Watch. But I think it's important to remember that when Steve Jobs announced the iPhone, he didn't announce the iPhone. He announced a revolutionary touchscreen iPod, a new way to communicate, and a fantastically enriched way to browse the internet. Tim Cook didn't announce the Apple Watch. He announced the world's most powerful timepiece, an intimate new way to communicate, and an accurate fitness tracker. You see, they aren't devices. They're platforms for identity. And how we tap in and use this information will change how brands, our friends, and our family perceive us. Our behavior in the coming year will become the platform for computing, not cloud. By 2020, most businesses will be designing and selling or giving away environments and habits, not apps. No one's going to buy a bunch of things for their house or for their phone. They're going to buy habits and environments. They're going to change who they are through the information they have. You see, we're not living in the world of the Internet of Things. We left that about 5 years ago. We're living in the personification of things. We don't want the internet here at this conference. We don't want to sit here and search it. We actually want the internet in the conference. We want the internet in the devices we're using because we are in the internet. For most of us, this means we're just walking web pages. For me, I don't mind admitting that I like people to answer me like they're Google, talk with me like they're Twitter, show me like they're Tumblr, have a stroll with me like they're my Fitbit, or be my lover like they're Grindr. So, in closing, no more applications unless you're handing someone back some of their own information. Don't design any new services unless you put a minimum viable human in them. People have to be able to put themselves in the device or service. Put the internet in your products, not your products on the internet. Create low-tech systems that avoid humans. People love that. It's unfortunate, but until we can get people used to being who they are, they're going to want these. Repeatable substandard beats inconsistently remarkable. We prefer to use automated systems because they're repeatably substandard. Unfortunately, some people are inconsistently remarkable. And insert yourself into the relentless now. We need to stop solving our human problems with technology and start solving our technology problems with our humanity. Thank you. So I have some questions that have come in on Twitter. Thank you for those of you who are asking on Twitter. And I've got someone who's going to give me some questions via text message. So hopefully we'll be able to get to all of these questions, maybe not, I'm not sure. But I'll get to as many as I can. So somebody asked me about the Feltron reports, which is something that Nicholas Fenton did. So yeah, I'm a big fan. So thank you for whoever asked. You can see they're back here. I love them. But what's interesting about his reports are they're all of his personal information, but they're printed in such a way that you can touch and you can feel them. So you can actually feel his information. And I think that makes them very, very powerful. Let me see if I can get another question in here. Yes, thank you. I enjoyed it too. Can you track data on your spiritual life? So yes, I actually do track data on my spiritual life, both praying and meditating. There's a couple different ways you can do it. You can actually just track your sitting time. There's a great app called Calm. It's on a website called calm.com. There are a lot of meditation timers that have insights, so they have timers tied to them. I actually did my meditation and my prayer through a combination of wearing a heart rate monitor, a galvanic skin response sensor, and then if I was praying, how much time I was praying, and then my actual body temperature. So taking my body temperature before and after is how I did that. And there's another one in here. So how much data do I generate a day? Okay, anywhere from 500 megabytes to a gigabyte data a day. So it's quite a bit of information, unfortunately. Storage is not cheap. See if I have anything else. Okay, here's one. Some of these, you guys asked very personal questions. So yes, I have measured just about everything that you can measure with your life. I think spending has been one of the most things that I thought would be kind of boring to measure. So how and when I spend money has been really interesting. I stopped tracking the actual categories of the types I spent instead of putting them in like home or bills or things like that, and I tagged them with like just a mood. And I wanted to see like if I'm just spending money out, what types of things happen. The other thing I thought was really interesting with the types of financial tracking I was doing was I use a bank that actually geo-tracks my finances. So I could see physically on a map where I was spending money if I wasn't spending money on the internet, which doesn't have a map really yet. So that was really interesting because I could see patterns between the time of day and where I was. Did I spend more money on vacations and certain types of locations? Did I spend more money alone when I was at the mall, or whether I was with other people at the mall? So it was a lot to learn. But the neat thing you can do with geofence transactions is you can set up really simple rules that say, if I spend more than X amount of dollars and I'm at a mall, lock my credit card. So instead of being locked down for what they always consider to be fraud, you should probably be locked down for your behavior and your location, which is not really fraud. I mean, if it's the day before Christmas and you're spending money at a clip, you need time management, not more money. And I think they're checking with the audience. I'm reading questions from Twitter and from Google to see if there's anything. Yep, it looks like they're checking. You're welcome. Um, so the question is, how might companies help customers make sense of their financial data? It's interesting. If you go to the grocery store, they give you a receipt, but they don't really give you any information about your own data. I think it's really powerful that if the grocery store actually gave me the calories and or carbohydrates or sugars of my total purchase, it would be a really powerful way to do that. Financial institutions, interestingly enough, at the end of the year, I always get kind of a breakdown of the types of things I spent money on for tax purposes, but I would love that real time all year long. It's funny, the bank statement itself hasn't evolved very much in 100 years. And yet we've got these, very robust banking systems. I think if financial institutions took a look at their customers' information and handed it back to them in some type of way, so they knew that maybe they did mobile deposits on a certain type of day, or a financial institution said, you visit a branch, at this frequency. That would help customers a lot, because most people aren't aware of the types of behavior that they actually are engaged in. So I think we need to be really careful with that. But it's definitely someplace where there'd be a lot of room for customer loyalty. I don't need more tech in my financial institutions. I need less tech in my financial institutions. I actually need to be able to text money, not take pictures of checks. Taking pictures of checks is actually a burden. If I could just text, something else, that same picture would make a lot more sense. But logging into an app, taking a picture of a check, it's a lot of work. You're welcome. Okay, well, I'm out of time. So I want to thank everybody and thank American Banker and the Banking Analysis Symposium and everyone. And I hope you guys have a great conference. I'm so sorry I couldn't make it. Just completely overwhelmed with things I'm trying to get done. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to your information. Be kind to each other. Thank you.